the LaChapelle family has generously donated their time tonight and their stories about their housing situation. So I'm going to turn it over to them. They'll tell you about what they've done with respect to housing, the challenges they've had, and their successes. And you're welcome to ask them questions both during their presentation and throughout the night.
Okay, great, thanks. My name is Dana LaChapelle. I'm joined by my husband, Rick LaChapelle, and my son, Matthew. Matthew also has a younger brother, Daniel, and a younger sister, Catherine. Daniel lives in Wilmette, very close to us, and our daughter, Catherine, lives in Colorado. We thought we would start out, I'm going to spend a few minutes just talking about what Matthew's current living situation is. Rick's going to talk about all the activities and extracurricular activities that Matthew's involved in, and then we'll really turn it over to the star of the show, who will tell you more about, why he loves his life, what the challenges are, what he likes most about it, etc. So, Matthew is currently living in a condo that we purchased in Evanston. It's a 2-bedroom condo. He has had roommates in the past, but he has found that he truly loves living alone and independently. And he can certainly answer some questions about that later. He receives approximately 4 hours a week of support from CIF tutors. And the tutor works with him on a variety of different things. One is she's become an extremely valued family resource to all of us, but she works with him on cooking. She works with him on scheduling all his calendar activities, his email, make sure he does his chores around the condominium to take care of it. She checks in with him on health and wellness, make sure he's taking care of himself appropriately. She's also evolved very recently into somewhat of a job coach as well. Since Matthew changed jobs this year, that's very, very important. Matthew has 2 jobs. He works at Trader Joe's 4 days a week, and he works at Lou Malnati's 2 days a week. At Lou Malnati's, he is a host for lunchtime, Saturdays and Sundays. And at Trader Joe's, he works in customer service, he does carts, he does bagging, he does lots of different things. One of the things that really has made his life successful, I think from our standpoint, is that the way his schedule is structured, he touches someone every day. Whether it be us, CIF support, his job, or his activities, there's lots of people, kind of a family looking in on him wherever he is. He relies pretty much on public transportation for everything, and if mom and dad can't fill in or public transportation doesn't work, he also knows how to use Uber. So that's always been very helpful. So Rick?
All right. Matthew's very busy outside of work. And as Dana said, he touches someone or someone touches him every day. And his activities really fall into 3 areas. One is sports, the other is acting, theater, and the last is being a spokesperson. In sports, he's involved in NSSRA, North Suburban Special Rec Association. He does basketball, volleyball, bocce. He's previously played softball as well. Recently, he's started trying out some of the programs at the Civic Center in Evanston. He did volleyball this year for a couple weeks. Mm-hmm. The other activities involved in is theater. He's involved in a company called ABLE, which is a theater group for people with disabilities. They meet once a week for a workshop. I think he's done 2-hour sessions and 4-hour sessions, and they work on various improv They do camera work, they do regular theater, they try to write their own plays, so he really enjoys that. He's involved in another theater company as well as an associate, a company called Collaboration. His involvement with Collaboration started in high school, and out of that, we've developed a very close relationship with the artistic director of Collaboration. So anytime Matthew can get involved in a production there, he's more than willing to help out. The other part of his life is being a spokesperson. This came out of his life plan, CIF life planning process. He said, "Yeah, I want to be a spokesperson." We said, "What?" "Yeah, I want to be a spokesperson for people with disabilities." He's involved in No Boundaries, which does disability awareness training for corporations. They go in and a group from No Boundaries talks about what it's like to be a customer of that company or any company with someone with a disability and the challenges that they encounter going to their stores. And that keeps them very busy.
So Matthew, do you want to comment on something?
Yeah, just
Questions at you.
go ahead, just for questions.
Okay, and please, if anyone has questions for him specifically, please feel free to raise your hand. But, I think one of the things that everybody wants to know is, why do you want to live on your own? Why don't you want to live with mom and dad?
Well, actually, so I went through college the past 2 years, and I realized through school I wanted to be a person who can to be myself, try to do more things for myself, not asking my parents for anything. I mean, it means like when you are living by yourself, it's hard sometimes. You got to ask for help. But with the thing I learned, both my parents, it's okay if you ask help, but it's hard to live independent. But I'm trying my best.
What do you like most about having a job?
The most thing about the job that you guys know, I work at Trade Close. That I got a new job of this year. I'm very glad I'm working there, and I'm working at Illuminati's. Actually, this November is my sixth year working there. And the thing is about work is that I love the people I work with. They look at me as a person, but not with a person who has Down syndrome. They'll look at me as someone that they can talk to, as a brother or to a friend.
Okay. Someone had a question?
Matthew, how old are you?
I'm 34, but I'm turning 35 this year.
Questions? Okay, so tell us about your favorite activity, acting.
My favorite activity with acting was at Able, is that we put on a show called We're Going to the Movies. Actually, no. One of the Able shows I did, I actually wrote a book about it. I wrote a book how I had my personal demons and stuff, and I wrote this show called The Cave. That was very cool because now I'm actually I always dreamed to be a playwright, and now I am. It feels good to have.
So acting and writing.
Acting and writing.
That's very good. So Matthew, what is the best thing about living by yourself?
The best thing living by myself is to have CIF. Also with Aunt Stecon, that it's the best thing because that if I didn't have CIF, I won't be independent. But it was hard when I came to CIF. But when I came to CIF, it provided me with a person always checking on me if I was sick or doing chores. But it feels good to have if my parents are traveling, I can have someone I can talk to.
What's the hardest thing about living by yourself?
Oh my God. The hardest thing I would say is your chores.
Your what? Your
Chores.
Oh, come on.
Well, it's chores and also life because you're working, like I'm working a lot and it's based on balancing your work, your house life, and your friends. I mean, it's like right now I'm working a lot of hours right now and I love it. But the hardest thing I'm dealing with right now is with work because I just love work and I just fall in love with my career.
What chore do you hate the most?
I don't hate any chore, but it's laundry.
Yeah.
Especially folding laundry, right?
Yeah. I like it.
Yeah.
The question?
Matthew, how long have you lived outside of your parents' house?
4 years now.
Okay.
Oh, no, it's been longer than that.
5 years, I think.
7.
7 years.
But who's counting?
Mom, no questions. Yes?
Matthew, what did you not like about having a roommate?
Well, it's like I had other roommates, but it's like the thing was it was hard enough because a lot of things that actually I have to eat gluten-free. So the thing is, the easiest thing is now is that the only thing I have in my house is all gluten-free. I have to eat gluten-free. So that's the hardest part, but it's hard enough, but I'm trying my best with that.
What else? What'd you tell Catherine?
What did you tell your sister about?
You don't have to share.
You don't have to share everything.
Yes.
Matthew, how old were you when you got your first job, and what was your first job?
I think I was
High school. Working at the,
I was really young, but I forgot what age I was. But I used to work at Grand Food Center, White in Winnetka. I liked that job because I could see all my high school friends, and now I still see them.
his first job was actually when he was in high school, and he was working in the summer park district program
Yeah,
as a junior counselor.
yeah, and I did.
Yes, he was paid.
Yeah, I did tiny tots. So
Right.
I did that the past 4 years, and I
Yeah,
loved it.
you did
I
that.
stopped after I broke my ankle.
Yeah, and and then
Playing
when he
softball.
was in transition program, after he graduated from, the regular senior year, he went into a transition, and he was older, so he only had about a year and a half in transition. He had a number of different
Yeah.
jobs, but they were
Actually-
unpaid.
So actually, the jobs were Ruby Tuesday. They were Barnes and Nobles.
Yeah,
And also Panera. Actually, Panera was a paid job.
yeah, that was a paid job,
And then he also did 2 years
a PACE
at the
program.
PACE program at
And-
National Louis University,
And also,
when they are located in Old Orchard.
And
yeah,
ever since that, he's been in paid positions, and that really is, it's just key to have a job. It's key to have that kind of
I
involvement.
would say the best thing having a job is you're getting paid, and you're making good friends at work too.
Yeah.
I have a question, Matthew, about grocery shopping and meals. How do you handle all of that?
Well, again, that's a great question. The thing is that based on meals is great because every Wednesday I cook, so I get a 10% out of, well, I had to say something.
Okay, discount.
At Trader Joe's, and my shopping list is always gluten-free.
Who helps you with that?
Well, my tutor is Didi Goldman, who is also in CIF. And it's like, what do you need the most? What do you need the least? But it's like, right now, I'm trying to figure out what I want. And that's the hard part, because I don't want to be overeating.
She's very strict about healthy eating, which
Yeah.
I love.
Me too.
Matthew makes all his own breakfasts. He can make eggs.
I cook.
He can cook, and he likes to cook.
And I'm thinking I'll go back to school for cooking.
I mean, another question? Yes, sir.
So, Matthew, did you attend New Trier, or where did you go to school?
You sure?
Where'd you go to school?
I went to, well, actually, there's two New Triers. It was the east,
West.
the west, the north and the east one. The best thing there was by high school, making friends. And I realized that I found out I have all these friends, and I did also I made great friends, and it was the best day of my whole life. Because I actually have two great friends that I know. I have a friend named David, who I knew from my first grade, who I still talk to, and my friend Steven, who I met from fifth grade, and we're like brothers.
Yeah. So he managed the high school basketball team, he
But
managed
Richmond-
the soccer team. He was
Yeah.
involved in a lot of things.
Yeah.
Come on, more question back there.
Yes.
Do you have any advice for people who want to live on their own?
Yeah. The advice I would give that it is hard to live on your own, but there's some challenges like work, getting paid, finding where you want to live. What the hardest thing is about working is like, what do I have the hobby for based on what work I want to do? It's based on what you like.
Believe in yourself.
And you always believe in yourself, and there's a model I always give myself, never give up.
John Cena, I think.
Mom,
Sorry.
any more questions?
All right. I think we need to move on, but we'll hang out. If you've got questions later on or when we break, we'll be here and be happy to answer them. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Megan Burke. As Mike had said, I'm an associate professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in the Department of Special Education. And I have a brother who's 25 and has Down syndrome. He lives with my parents in Western Springs. He has not moved out yet, but I will tell him about you to try to incentivize him. And I also have a 5-year-old son with a disability. So I'm going to provide some kind of research or statistics talking about housing and what's available. I think when we typically think about housing, one of the barriers, we think about formal supports and services that you would need to be able to live independently or in some kind of other housing situation. But across the country, 25% of people, only 25% of people with disabilities receive formal services and supports. And when you break this down even further, we see that of those 25%, 71% receive supplemental security income or SSDI, which is like financial assistance that can go towards your housing. 44%, so significantly less, are on some kind of Medicaid waiver for home and community-based services, and then 15% receive VOC rehab services. So not many people are receiving those supports that we frequently think of that can assist with housing. As you could probably guess, there's several issues with this. First of all, 75% of people are not receiving any kind of service or support. That's a huge issue. Second of all, just because you're receiving SSI or SSDI doesn't mean that that's enough support for you to be able to live in quality housing, right? So for my brother, for example, he's on SSI, he also receives VOC rehab services, and he just got on the Medicaid waiver. So that's 3 services right there, and he still does not want to move out of the family home, right? Probably because he's one of 5, and now he finally has the run of the house. So props to him for not wanting to leave it. But so that's another issue, is that we really need a lot of supports usually to think about housing. The third issue is when we talk about research. Most of our research is only looking at those people who are receiving formal services and supports. So we actually don't know much about 75% of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities across the country. So we really can't tell you what their support needs are, what kind of services do we need, what kind of policy changes need to be made to help those people. The final piece that's an issue with this that I'll talk about, we could probably go on, is that these formal services and supports are just not enough. So we've looked at people who receive natural supports, which we're defining as like unpaid support. Maybe you have a family friend who's willing to drive your child to and from school, or you have a church-going member who picks up your child and takes them to church, something like that, unpaid supports. And we see that even among these people who are receiving these formal services and supports, they're actually more likely to also be receiving natural supports. So this is not even telling us the entire story. And with respect to research, we know very little empirically about how do those natural supports work, who's designing them, who's creating them, what works under what conditions. So we just have very little understanding about putting all these pieces together. In terms of looking at Illinois compared to the rest of the country, this is always so hard when you live in Illinois to talk about services because it's depressing, so I'm sorry. This is probably why we don't end with my slides. Right? We're 44th out of all the states in terms of funding for community-based disability services. As we'll talk about in another slide, we still fund our institutions, which usually a person who's in an institution costs at least $300,000 a year for that one person. So you literally cannot fund institutions while also providing home and community-based services. You cannot fund those systems at the same time, which is why we're having less, one of the reasons why we have less funding going to that. We're 49th in terms of residential placement in community settings of 6 or less. Again, institutions, we have much larger settings. 77% of people with IDD live in settings of 1 to 6. In Illinois, that drops to 42%. And then we spend significantly less money for those settings. What I think is really important here, if you look at the asterisk at the top, in 6 states, most people live in settings of 3 or less. And this is all relative. There's no research that says 3 is the magic number. There's no research that says 6 is the magic number. This is all kind of what you're used to, what you're accustomed to, what that person wants and what they need. In Illinois, we've defined 6 as a small setting. In other states, they're saying that's too big. That's double what we want it to be. We want it to be 1 to 3. So just to give you a sense of how relative all of this is. Mm-hmm.
What are the 6 states that have 3 or fewer?
Oh, this is a great game. Anybody have a guess? What are the 6 states that have such smaller settings? Wisconsin? I don't know. Do you know? No. Minnesota is one of them. Massachusetts? I think it would be like, I don't know for sure, but the better states, Washington, Oregon, Minnesota, and basically anything that's in the South would not be a good state. Right?
And Illinois.
And Illinois, yeah, we're the exception. Mm-hmm. Really, you can only go up from here. But wasn't that fun? Right? Okay. Current realities, state institutions. There are 14 states that are entirely deinstitutionalized. They have 0 institutions in their states. In Illinois, we have 7. We had started deinstitutionalization again under, I think it was Governor Quinn. Yep, he had started it again. Then under Rauner, it stopped. Now under Pritzker, maybe, yeah. If you contact him, maybe that'll go our way. But we still have these 7 pretty large institutions that are still serving people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and that are still very costly. 70% of people nationally continue to live with their family caregiver. This is the same as in Illinois. And as a professor of undergraduate students who are all becoming special ed teachers, I can say that when they graduate at 22, they often do not have disabilities, they are also going back and living with their parents, right? So like normative, non-normative, looking kind of the same from my perspective. Where it starts to differ is that 24% of people with IDD are still living with family caregivers who are age 60 and older. Okay, and that's where we're starting to see some of the need of let's intervene, let's look at housing, let's consider our options, and let's maybe move outside of the family home somewhere else before a crisis occurs where your family caregiver, usually the parent, passes away or is no longer able to provide quality caregiving. In terms of the PUNS list, how many people in here are on the PUNS list? Okay. We should all be on the PUNS list. So the PUNS list is the list for our home and community-based Medicaid waiver. In Illinois, we have 20,000 people on our list. And you know, as you can kind of look in this room, that is probably actually an underestimate of the number of people who really need and would qualify for those services. So those are services and supports you could receive either in the home or like a group home supported living, something like that. And 10,000, over 10,000 of those people are looking for residential services. Okay. So housing, where are they going to live? Returning back to this story about the family and kind of how does the family fit into this about housing. When you ask siblings, adult siblings of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, where is your brother or sister going to live in the future when they move out of the family home? Half of siblings say they're going to live with me. That's my plan. I'm designing another room. My husband's right now redoing our basement just for Ryan. It's not going to be as nice as my parents' basement, but he's redoing the basement so Ryan has a place that he could live or frequent or whatever he chooses to do. This is very common. But when the rubber hits the road and you actually get down to it, usually that number drops to about 10%. So 50% say it's going to happen in the future, only 10% actually end up doing it. The exception to this is siblings of people with Down syndrome. Yes, me. 50% of siblings of people with Down syndrome say my brother or sister is going to live with me, and 50% actually do. Okay, unclear as to why that's happening in Down syndrome and not necessarily with other types of disabilities. What's interesting about this, though, is that it's only from the sibling perspective, right? So it's only from my perspective. If you ask me, where is Ryan going to live? I would say he might live with me, okay? If you ask any of my other siblings, where is Ryan going to live? They would each say that he's going to live with them, okay? Yes, if you ask Ryan who he's going to live with, if I'm in the room, he'd say he's going to live with me. If Jessica's in the room, my sister, he'd say he's going to live with her. If Shane was in the room, he would definitely say he was going to live with Shane. But if Amy was in the room, my baby sister, I don't know that he would say Amy. I think he'd draw a line. However, we've actually done studies asking him with an unbiased person, with none of us in the room, Ryan, where do you want to live in the future? And he says, in an apartment by myself in Arlington Heights, which is not at all where we live, right? So this idea of like parents can have one dream, siblings can have another dream, and the person with a disability may have a different dream, and really the research that we need to be doing is holistically looking at each of those expectations to understand how they're going to pan out. Mm-hmm.
So do you know where the difference is, where they actually live? If 50% said they live close to reside.
Yeah, in a group home. They end up usually living in a group home.
Such as?
Such as like a Scylla or another home with other people with disabilities or some kind of supported living situation. Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Okay. What we do know, and kind of getting to a more positive note, is then when people with disabilities live in smaller settings, they have better outcomes, right? They engage in greater choice making, like what they want to eat, what they want to do during the day, recreational activities, greater self-advocacy and self-determination. They have more friends, larger social networks, more chances to develop and maintain independent living skills, like the laundry, even if you don't like to do it. I don't like to do it either. Greater acceptance from community members who are seeing them engaged in the community, and greater community life participation. Better standard of living, greater employment and satisfaction with their jobs, improved access to family, friends, and services, greater preventative health care, and just overall life satisfaction. So really, the benefits go on and on and on about living in smaller settings for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And that's me.
Great. So questions for Megan. She is, in fact, the one who has the research background and kind of knows what the research can tell us. Anything for Megan?
Question up front, Randy.
Megan?
Sweet. Hold on for the microphone. Thanks.
The settings or the exceptions for co-residing
Yeah.
are siblings of individuals with Down syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any research on ASD, autistic spectrum disorder?
No. This is really just starting to emerge. This idea of like siblings are taking on these caregiving roles, people with disabilities are living longer. It's really just starting to see these cohorts coming out and it happening. So it'll be interesting to see, literally the studies that I show here are the only 2 studies that have looked at this, which is kind of frightening. So it'll be interesting to see how autism ends up playing out. In a couple years, I'll tell you.
I'm going to call you.
How about larger housing areas like Misericordia and that sort of thing? Are they in the study or anything like that?
Yeah, we did have a study, and I can send it to you, that doesn't necessarily tease out congregate settings quite like that, but does tease out bigger settings, 7 to 16 people, 16 and more people, and showing that if you compare those settings to smaller settings, you would still see greater choice making, improved access to services, a few more better outcomes among people with disabilities in the smaller versus the larger settings.
Yeah, I have a question too. How you said that how people who like to live at their family home, because I think it's hard to let go of that home.
Say it again?
So you know how you said how
do you let go
how
of
people like to stay home at their family home, and that's kind of hard to hold on. But
Yeah.
I think you make a good point, because I done that the same way, but it was hard. But it was challenging. But I would have support of someone to challenge other people who have different disabilities to live by themselves.
Right. Thank you for sharing that.
Okay, all right, so we're going to plow through here. So at the last presentation, those of you who were here, I don't know, how many people were at the last presentation? Oh, just a few, okay. Oh, wow, okay, whole new group. We talked about the policy statement of the ARC, and that their position is that all people, regardless of disability, deserve the opportunity to live a full life in their community, where they can live, learn, and play alongside each other through all stages of life. And that's a statement that's from the national ARC, their policy statement. And then we also talked a little bit, and if you're not aware of the 2022 rules that are coming up from Medicare and Medicaid, there are several things that they're saying around the funds that flow from the federal government, from these organizations. And around housing, two of the points are that an individual should be integrated and have full access to the greater community, so that settings for housing should be integrated and have full access to the greater community, and should be selected by the individual based on their needs and preferences. So the individual should have a role in choice, and that indeed there's integration, and that is the policy that's being put forward for 2022. And what these agencies are saying is that you need to show that you're doing that as an agency service provider, that the service settings you're providing services in are like that, or they will look at corrective action and or decreasing funds. Most of you know that about half of the funds that come into Illinois come from the federal government, and the other half are state. So it's significant if they reduced funds from the federal government because you weren't meeting these rules. So states have had to develop transition plans to be able to move in this direction, and they had to be approved that said that they were going to move towards this kind of housing setting. We talked also at the last time that we were together just briefly about inclusive housing considerations. So thinking about, finding or creating affordable solutions, helping to make sure that you're creating community in a setting where you might share space and relationship, and then engaging the appropriate supports in that housing, and also ensuring that there is access to the community. Inside the materials that you were handed, there is a list of kind of housing models or housing types that this was generated by an organization in New Jersey that is a supportive housing association in New Jersey, and they worked with their Council on Developmental Disabilities to publicize and put out a book around housing in New Jersey, which we think is one of the best models across the country of the folks who have done this kind of thing for their state. And they kind of broke housing possibilities into these different kind of categories. So this idea of you could have a shared living or life sharing situation where the individual might own a space and have someone who rooms with them to split the cost, or who actually lives with them and provides some supports in exchange for rent or other things. So that's a shared living kind of situation. You can have Support families in our area. Host homes are a part of the equation. So this is, for lack of a better term, adult foster care. But there's usually training and monitoring that comes with that as an option. And then there's also old-fashioned board and care homes where somebody gets a single room occupancy, and then there's people there providing meals and providing some services. There are group homes, and there are more intensive specialized group homes as well, and most of those are agency owned. We do need to say that across the country, the trend is to separate housing options from support services. And the reason for that is, again, about an individual's right to, if they live in a house that's their home and they don't like the services and supports they're getting, they can fire their support worker without having to leave their home. If it's an agency-owned setting, then they'd have to leave the home to be able to get services from someone else. So this trend across the country is to be able to give individuals more ability to choose their own supports and be satisfied with the kinds of supports they're getting and not have to leave a setting or a home that they've established. So group homes, again, are typically agency owned, although there are some independent group home settings as well that are not service agency owned. There's a concept called supervised apartments, and this might be a cluster of apartments in an apartment building where people are getting services. We actually heard of a model where a group of families put in 4 apartments into an apartment building that were adjacent to each other, and then they made doors between them, and that was a SILA. And that's in a different state than ours, although it might be something that could be possible depending on how receptive folks up the channel are to, would that meet the requirements for a SILA. And a SILA, when I'm talking about a SILA, what I mean here is a 24/7 support situation, okay? So there's also supportive housing. Now, supportive housing is happening a lot in the mental health area, and that is where they're designing and developing affordable housing, and a support provider would be actually having an office that's on the site. So for people with disabilities, this isn't happening in Illinois, but it is happening for people with mental health diagnosis. In fact, there's something called the Northwest Suburban Task Force that's doing a lot of work up in this area to develop those kinds of options for people who have that mental health diagnosis. And Kenneth Young has been their on-site support provider, although they're engaging other people as well. So supportive housing is a move across the country. Some states are, the way their funding streams work, mental health and developmental disabilities fund through the same stream, and so they have better options around that kind of program, whereas in Illinois, they're separate funding streams, so they don't always work as well. So but we hope that there'll be more coming along that line as well. There's, of course, in-home with family support as an option, but there's also things like accessory apartments. We've seen families actually develop an accessory dwelling unit and a place where it's zoned that they could do that, and the parents move into that, and the kid starts renting the other rooms in the house, because that's his home. He didn't want to leave his home, and he gets to rent out the house and live there, and then the support is from this support or accessory apartment unit. The parents provide that, and then think down the road, a support person could live there in that setting and provide supports to the individuals in that setting. So it's another kind of creative way to think about housing. And along with that, there's things like, you know, the tiny house movement has been a big deal. We've had some families say, gee, I'd like to just plant a couple tiny houses on my land. Well, only if, again, you can get by with that with the zoning in your area. And elder cottages are another thing that are happening for aging adults. Again, these kind of accessory units, maybe on other land, that they can put in these smaller living units, and then there'll be supports nearby. So intentional community is another thing that's really happening out there, and we want to be clear about what I mean by that. Intentional communities are different than what I'm going to call these community cooperatives. So intentional communities many times are co-living or co-housing arrangements where people say, we're going to create something that is unique here, and we're going to involve people with and without disabilities who many times they say do life together, share life together. And so specific ones that we've referenced and that are in the handout that you can read about are L'Arche, which many of you probably already know about L'Arche. There's a house here in Chicago. That's a movement that's been around for a long time, and it is religiously based. And then there's also Campbell communities, which are kind of located throughout the world, but in the United States, there are some of those. And again, these are intentional communities where people say, we want to live intentionally with people of all abilities, and we're going to figure out how to do that well together. And they've created this kind of a community. That's one form of an intentional community. And again, there are co-housing communities going up all over the country around different kinds of intention. And those communities many times are about making being environmentally responsible, doing something like organic farming, those kinds of things. And there are also co-housing communities being developed for aging baby boomers like me. So folks that's another alternative to the nursing home and the big developments that are being made for retirement communities is a co-living environment where you live with other people who are also aging and you age in place together. And it's an intentional kind of thing. So that's what intentional communities are. And then community cooperatives. So this is a recent kind of, well, not real recent, there have been a lot of these over time, but it's a kind of a farm, ranch, gated, segregated community model. And it is secured, and there are only people with disabilities living there with the people who support them. The 2022 rules that I said from Medicare and Medicaid would tell you that that's probably not going to fly real well. Is it integrated into the community, which is one of the things they say you have to have full integration into the community? And so some of these settings may be under something called heightened scrutiny when those rules come into place. And they're going to be looked at carefully to see, does the individual with disability living in a place like that, if they've chosen to live there, that individual living in a place like that have the same access to community? Can they work in the community? Can they get to the community? Can people in the community interact with them? Do they interact with the community? Are they engaged in community activities? As anyone else who lives near them. That's going to be the whole thing of what's it really making possible. The research that's been cited is stuff that's been done over years around settings that provide the best outcomes for quality of life for individuals with disabilities. And some of these things that I'm talking about, these more gated, segregated, have been around a long time, but there are also new models being created out there. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of those, just kind of share what's happening out there a little bit with you. So just to give you a few examples of what I've been talking about. So we're with Center for Independent Futures, we started in the housing kind of creation. In 2006, we actually trained our first training for people outside of Evanston, where we went out to Ann Arbor and trained a family group. But in 2003, I think is the first one, yeah, you'll see there's a family home kind of up on the slide, and that's a 3-flat. So it's already zoned to have multiple units. There's 3 individuals on each floor, and so they're renting in an apartment setting, and they're sharing living space and have their own bedrooms. There's 2 baths. And then we have someone called a community builder that we put on that top floor that's an overnight presence for security. And that's really all their job is. They actually have full-time jobs outside of the overnight support. Most of them are, 75% are special educators and or paraprofessionals. And then we have some very creative artistic type people who want to do life with other people who also tend to be really great community builders. So that's that first kind of model that we said, okay, this is a possible way for people to be able to rent in the community. It's in a residential neighborhood, so they're pretty integrated. They can get right to their closest by grocery store and shopping area. It's really convenient. And then the second model was a apartment building with rented units. And so there's 6 units in that middle apartment building that was created in 2004. Families came together and created an LLC and bought that building. So they created a business and bought the building, a limited liability corporation bought the building, and they got the down payment by saying that those people who bought in would buy shares. So people with more resources bought more shares, so 5 shares, $10,000 each, or people with less resources bought 1 share, $10,000, whatever, and they made a down payment on that building. And then they were able to take out the loan for the rest. right? So in that building is 6 apartments. There's a community builder family in one of them right now, who actually, he grew up as a teenager in the building with his mom, who was our first community builder there, and then said when he got married, he wanted to live there and show his kids what it was like. So as he's now got 3 kids. And so a community builder family in one of the units, and then the rest of the units are individuals with disabilities. One of the apartments is shared with 2 people, the rest are singles. So each have their own apartment, except for the one that had roommates. That is all individuals with disabilities, and there are some states that would not allow that to happen. Like Washington, D.C., if you were getting federal benefits of any kind, Medicaid, Medicare, you can't share a ceiling or a wall with someone else getting benefits, or you're not integrated enough. So every state have different rules around this, and when we work with people across the country, we have to figure out what are those rules, and how do you make sure you're developing or creating something that will work in your particular location. And then there's different zoning rules in communities that you have to pay attention to when you think about creating a solution for an individual. And the last model up there is condominium. So we looked at home ownership. How could we help people own their own place? And we designed, there was a development being built. The developer didn't know how to do affordable housing, and we wanted to create 5 affordable units for ownership. And so we worked with a nonprofit developer who knew how to do affordable housing, and he helped bring the rates of the apartments from around $350,000 down to about $150,000 with a combination of federal funds, state funds, city funds, county funds, and that's what affordable housing developers do, is they find ways to find money to bring down the costs. And so we had 5 families buy in at a more affordable mortgage rate. And then in addition, that's a tower of about 60 units was the first one with 5 individuals. They completed a second tower next to it with 60 units. So there's 120 units in that 2-tower development. And we now have 18 individuals interspersed throughout the development that are getting supports from community builders on site. So these are models that we started to say, what do families want to do? We worked with families. We started with 19 families who said housing's most important, how do we do it? And we worked together to figure this out, and then we started training people. So there's some models or ideas about how this is done. So yeah, we've got a couple more examples of groups we've worked with, and then I want to show you what's going on across the country. So we have a question back here.
Yeah, you used the word community builders a few times. Can you clarify, because each place has different needs for community builders?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So there was a feeling like we needed to have, and I'm going to call the community builder what we say they are, is nosy neighbors. So they're folks who live in the location. They check in. Their responsibilities are check in with an individual once a day. They also do weekly meetings with the folks that might live in that setting. They also, and they build personal relationships with all these folks. They also help build relationships among the individuals who live there, and they'll do some social activities. Again, it's a limited responsibility, and those folks for us are paid by their rent is free. They don't have to pay for the housing. So it's one way to put that kind of support in place around a person. But the individuals who live in these spaces that we support have more support than just that. They have case management, they have skills tutors, but this is one type of support that's kind of out there and available in a layered support setting. More and more places are using technology supports, remote support kinds of tools, and also even off-the-shelf safe home technology kinds of things, and the Alexas of the world that can actually coach somebody with a task, tell them the task steps to take, help manage a calendar, order things for them. I mean, there's different kinds of new things that are coming in that can help support more independence, and that's what more and more places are starting to use. But the community builder is that kind of support. And that role can be used in a lot of different ways, and we know other organizations that are putting in place that kind of support, but they have different responsibilities. So another question over here.
Just to make sure, all of these are in Evanston?
These 3 models were developed in Evanston, yes. Yeah? So can I ask what a lot more means? Is this hand-over-hand support? So they have to have someone dress them, feed them, take them and put them on the bathroom? You know, what's the support level? All of that situation?
They all have autism.
Mm-hmm.
They all speak via spelling. They're all very, they're very intelligent, but they have a problem with their motor planning. So when it comes to, I need to make a meal, sure, he can make a meal with me, and he does a lot of great things. My son amazes me every day, the things he does, but this is, like, I don't leave him alone. The police would call me, would be called if they did. I mean, it'd be unsafe. So I just trying to figure out, because he wants independence, he wants an intellectually stimulating life, but he needs that support. And I just trying to figure out how we're going to do it. And that's kind of why we're here.
Yeah. And you're not obviously alone.
Yeah.
So we are working with people in kind of housing across the country, and there are some folks who are cannot speak about their desires, but are using spelling boards to be able to communicate, other kinds of things. And families are working together to try to figure out how to set up a support model that works for them. And why are they doing that? Because 75% of individuals live at home with their parents, 25% are 60-year-old caregivers, and the solutions aren't out there. There's not enough money, and as you heard, only 25% of people with disabilities even are getting formal services. So families are starting to have these conversations and across the country to work this out. No matter what level of independence an individual has, we believe anyone can live independently. It's a matter of how you structure and put together a support plan. We also believe families come together and can provide and can share resources to do that. That the whole idea is you could try to do that alone, but it's overwhelming. So how do families try to figure out how to work together to be able to put together resources needed for that, and then how do you try to explore what kinds of resources you can get? So I'm not going to tell you it's impossible. I am going to tell you that there are people out there working on trying to find ways for people who have more significant need of support to be able to develop solutions like this. So. Absolutely.
That's what I think.
Absolutely. And so there are people developing, and we're going to see a couple of models of them, of inclusive affordable housing models that have 100 units, and 25% of them are for people with disabilities, and 75% of them are for people who are graduated scales of need for affordability. And frankly, some of the current statistics say that 54% of the people in the country need affordable housing. It's like, because we're being priced out of so many markets. Incredible to try to buy into some of these markets. And then 25% of them are market rate, and they try to balance that. And so you've got 25 people in that setting who could pool some way to think about supports. It's a little different, but it's integrated. It's not just individuals with disabilities, so it will meet some of the rules and requirements. So we're going to look at a couple of examples.
Let's move forward with the slides, though. We'll have time for questions at the end if we don't get to them all. We have a lot of other examples we want to share with everyone tonight. So
write down your question so you don't forget it, and you can still listen to the rest, and then we'll come back to them. Okay. So here's another couple of examples. These are families in Ann Arbor, Wisconsin. One side is rental, the other side are condominiums. So, I'm sorry. Did I say Wisconsin? Ann Arbor, Michigan. Oh my goodness. Yeah, the Michigan people would kill me. So we worked with them starting in 2006. They opened their first in 2008. These were 6 rental units they put in there. Then in 2011, they put 6 condos into that development. And then 2013, 6 more condos became available throughout the time period, and then 14, 6 more rental. And they have community builders, and these are college kids, because what a great community. You get community builders, peers, who are looking for free rent and will help provide some on-site, overnight kind of support. So that's what happened in Ann Arbor as they kind of developed what they were doing. And this is an example in Washington, D.C. The Crossings is what it's called. In 2014, we did a training. In 2016, this was 2015, after we did the training, one of these moms said, you know, my kid could live on their own, but I just want more community. So we know you're looking in a certain area. We're going to have her go out and get her into her own condo, but we know you're going to open something else in our area, and we can network, and we still have relationship. We've built this relationship with these other families. It's great. We're just going to go ahead. So in 2016, they approached this developer when he was starting the project and said, we need 6 affordable units. In Washington, D.C., affordable is relative, right? So workplace affordability is what they were looking for. And the developer said, well, what are you trying to do? And they told them, you know, we got families with kids with disabilities. We want to integrate into a place where there's people without disabilities, but we're going to have they have a community builder offsite for this particular location. And so we want to develop this idea. And he looked at me and said, okay, I'm going to do it. And they said, what? And he said, I have an 8-year-old with a disability. I know what you're trying to do, and I want to be part of this game. So the reality is more and more people have people in their life with disabilities, and they think, this is some way I can support this kind of effort. This is what I do. I'm a developer. Maybe I could support making that happen. This is a community house on Wilmette. This was this is a shared living situation, and they have a person living in the house, and that is, she has her own bedroom suite. And then there's four individuals with disabilities that live there. And the family group kind of created that. That was what they wanted. And they said, we're going to kind of create this in the area. And that was created in 2017. So here's some other ideas of things that are happening out there. So this is a group called Sweetwater. They're located in Sonoma, California, all individuals with autism and all 24/7 support. And in California, you actually can get that. And, sorry. So this group of families is actually very interesting. They created what I'm going to call a co-housing community because they created an organic farm. It's walkable to their, community, so it's easy to get in and out of the community. So there's integration where people go into the setting to work on the farm, and there's integration where people can easily get into the community and have relationship. And so this was created in 2013, and this group is currently doing replication conferences. So you can go out and find out how they did what they did by going to a replication conference where they train people how to do what they were trained to do. So we want to hold questions until...
Go ahead, take one.
You want to take, she's been waiting.
Yeah.
Oh.
Go ahead. Yeah, take that one.
So I'm being told I should take your question.
Leave it there.
Sweetwater, isn't that a very expensive private pay one?
Yeah, so Sweetwater is actually getting supports through a agency, and my understanding is that families do use their government funds to be able to help pay for the services there.
Okay, so
now there are some other very expensive private pay ones you're going to see, but that's not my understanding about Sweetwater.
So in Illinois, I would like to bring it back to Illinois. So the examples you showed, are any of those residents receiving SILA housing funding? SILA funding. Does anybody get SILA funding?
So in the examples that we showed, that's home-based.
Right.
And do we support people with SILA? Yes, but the examples we showed are home-based funds.
Oh, so everyone has
Being
home-based funding,
for.
and then, so do you always...
Or private pay. There are some private pay, and there's some combination.
So then you have another agency come in, so everyone contracts with their own agency then for services?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Oh, what about how the residents are being served with an agency for work, job coaches, all of that? Do they have other services? Does everybody have their own service vendor, kind of? Like, does one person use Clearbrook, another person use Keshet?
So
Everyone's
any of
got their
those
own...
people could choose whoever they want,
Yeah.
but we are providing services to the folks in those examples that I showed you in Evanston.
So are you a provider then?
So Matthew, who spoke earlier, Matt, he is one of the people we provide services to. He lives in his own apartment in Evanston. And those 3 housing kind of models, we don't own them. Families created them, and we provide supports to the people who live there.
Okay.
Okay.
Do we want SILA funding then? Because,
Do we want what?
these kinds of things we can't get if we have SILA funding, correct?
Do you want SILA funding?
We want SILA funding, do we want? Do you know what I'm saying? Is SILA funding a negative for these kinds of housing?
So SILA funding comes with a lot of requirements, right? You have to become licensed to be able to provide services in a SILA setting. And there are some requirements about making sure that they have, like your private home might not have sprinkler system, but a Scylla-funded home has to have one. And you have to have exit signs at the doors, and you have to be inspected. And so Scylla funding comes with a lot of requirements. There are some people who are going to need them to live, Scylla funding to live, right? Because that's the maximum where you get the most money, but how will you house is the question. And there are some ways, some families have been doing, what am I trying to think of Terry Steinberg's group? Yeah. I'm sorry, my age is catching up with me. So some families are creating and getting licensed to be Scylla providers in a home. Thank you. Microboards. Do people know about the microboard movement a little bit? Okay, so that's something you should get informed about if you don't know about microboards. It's certainly one way families who have more need could structure around a plan where you could get Scylla funds, the fuller funding model. So if you don't know about microboards, you should definitely do some investigation. There is a website on microboards. All you have to do is look up Illinois microboards and you'll find it. Google it and you'll find it. And there are some folks that have been doing this for a while and have kids living in these settings. So, yeah. Oh, I have 10 minutes, I was told, so I'm going to go and finish. So,
Jackie, can I just jump in for 1 second, just on the Scylla funding? Just 1 second.
It's up to you.
Yeah, I will. And the thing is, we also have individuals that are part of our community, either participate in activities or part of other community opportunities that have Scylla funding. They live in a condominium, 2-bedroom condominium. They have a roommate. They have significant support needs. They're Scylla agency. Their agency. It's not us. But another agency provides those support staff for them, and they're living in integrated settings in Evanston. They still participate in a lot of social activities with us. Just because someone receives Scylla funding doesn't mean that they don't have a life that involves a lot of other people and things that they're going to do other than just the support they get from the agency. So I would just encourage you to be, and we can always put you in touch with families who are receiving that 24/7 Scylla funding and be able to get an idea on how that can look differently than maybe how you're right now kind of tuned in to think it looks.
So if you're used to the funding model, meaning a group home, there are some people who have different kinds of options, and that's what Leanne's talking about. Okay, so another example here is First Place, Arizona. They opened about a year ago. This is a major effort by a mom who has a son with autism, and it is right now private pay only, and it is also only individuals with disabilities living in the space. And this is happening across the country. There are families creating things, some who are doing more integrated things, others who are saying, oh no, gated, segregated. And there is certainly a lot of conversation going on right now about these two different models and what can work and not. If they stay private pay, then the government funding issue doesn't matter, because none of the people in that setting are using government funds to pay for what they're getting. But the goal is to think about, for this organization, they're thinking about how can we make this more possible for more people. So we'll see. I mean, this is an interesting new model. And for me, it's like, what are they doing? And they tout Arizona as being the most disability-friendly state in the country, and why. And so it's very interesting. And I'd encourage you, if you want, they do a conference every year. If you have $1,200 and you'd like to go, 3 days. I've been wanting to go. But anyway, just to learn about what they do, look them up on the website, see what they're about. I mean, for us, part of working with families who are starting to think about doing these things, part of what we do is train people and lead them through a process to develop housing. And this is the kind of models that some people are thinking about, bigger models like this. And what could they look like? And how could we make that happen? And how could we make it integrated so we could make sure other people's funding did it? This is an example of a pocket neighborhood, and Ross Chapin is like the master of pocket neighborhoods. That's kind of his gig. And this is in the Southwest as well. They work really well in warmer climates because you're building small living spaces and then porches, which are kind of intermediate spaces, and then shared lawns. And it's all about forcing people out into community. It's a great co-living model too, of if you have intentional want to be able to be in relationship with the people who are in your neighbors. You know, that's what this kind of model is all about. And this is the first one that's being built for individuals with disabilities, and this is called Luna Azul. It's also in Arizona. So go ahead, Phoenix. Oh, I was having you switch it. So co-living is a new thing for young professionals who want to be in relationship with people, but they don't have a lot of money, and these housing markets are pricing them out. So co-living, and there's a company called The Commons, is developing across the country. And what this is smaller living settings, shared dining and living area and kitchens. So you have your own place, and you could cook there and stay there forever. But again, it's a way of inside a space that doesn't have warm all the time, where you force people out into being community. And young people are saying, yes, I'm working, I can't afford that rent, but I could afford to live in a commons space. Commons is the developer, and share space with other people. And they're actually pretty upscale. They do your laundry and clean your apartment. It's pretty amazing. And we actually know that there are some housing folks looking at this as a wonderful opportunity for people with disabilities to be integrated. If you could put people with disabilities sprinkle throughout that, they're living with their peers, and then provide some support. So young people who are out there in the world about the same age as them, it could be a really cool kind of thing. And so there's been conversations we know with different people thinking about housing in making that possible. So that's a co-living setting. So I'm done with my part. You want to finish and then we take questions?
If there's questions specifically on those housing options, let's take them. Wait for the microphone, wait for the microphone.
We got one right
I want
here.
to talk about medical parts, like if a person has, I don't know, seizures or just a lot of medical aspects, how that is being handled in various, I don't know, I guess it would depend on the housing that you pick.
Again, so for you, if you're creating it, you'd have to figure that out. Again, we're saying there aren't a lot of options out there for you to do. So we're suggesting that parents have to come together and figure it out. We have somebody that we just worked with out in the western suburbs who had a son with seizure disorder, and so they did some things with, certainly with technology to be able to determine if something was going on, but they also have to figure out remote support for that person. Is there somebody always available and watching? How do you take care of that? So obviously you need to figure out, look at the tools that are out there and figure out how could we do that. I just talked to a parent who talked about that very issue and talked about getting together with a group of families, creating a housing situation that they could share responsibility, and then how would they train people, next generation caregivers, kind of to be able to take that on as things went on. So they talked about, instead of one of us always having to be up, how about we share that responsibility and work out something so that there's an opportunity for some respite and other care. So, other questions?
Let's get the microphone passed forward there.
Okay, yeah.
So what you're talking about sounds fantastic. How, as a family, do we network with other families? I know a few people in my community. Most of them are boys. I have a daughter. You know, I'm looking for other families with similar needs, with children with similar levels of function. Like Matt, my daughter went to the REACH program. She did live independently. I don't want her back in my house. I want her to move on and, you know.
Of course you do. Yeah, of course you do.
Let me take that one in the next section, if you don't mind.
Okay,
We'll address
so
that.
hold
We have
on
more
to it and we'll
question
get
here.
to it.
Excuse me, I didn't hear your presentation very clearly at the beginning. And what is it that you specifically bring to one of these communities? How are you in contact with the people who are resident? And what are the qualifications, the symptoms? What are the difficulties that someone coming to a housing unit such as you're describing, how do they qualify? What do they have? Monetary, physical, I don't know, emotional? I don't know what kind of
So we're not here to talk about what Center for Independent Futures provides. What we are here to talk about is to get you thinking about a different approach to housing, because there's not options out there. And if you got kids right now that you're trying to figure this out for, you need to step in and start to try to figure it out, okay? That is what this conversation is about. And it is about, there are a lot of models happening all over the country. I mean, we got a family member, I'm sorry, going to point you out, sitting right in the front here, who's working with us to develop something on the North Shore. And the reality is families have come together, gone through our training, because that's what we do. We work with families and train them about how to do this and consult with them to do this. And families are using their energy and expertise to move initiatives forward to create options. So we're not here to solve your housing problems. I couldn't. I wish I could. I wish I had all the money in the world and could say to everybody leaving here, there's a solution for you. I cannot say that. And I have to say the job is to get up and start to know other people and work with other people and find answers together and use resources like ours who've helped families do this across the country. And you need to start to be inventive. I mean, it's just the reality. I wish I could say something different. And if we could, we would all say something different. But it is not, unfortunately, the reality.
All right, so let's run through this last segment. We'll take final questions, and if we don't have time to get to your question before 8:30, we want to be respectful of everyone's time. We appreciate you coming out tonight with us. We will stay afterwards and answer your questions individually if we don't get to them. Again, we appreciate your time. One of the things I wanted to point out to you, did you all notice the dates on all these great new housing opportunities? They all start with a 2. A lot of them had a teen digit attached to them. So I've got a brother on the autism spectrum. He turns 50 in 2 weeks. When he was born, my parents had 2 options. Large institution, give the kid away and never see him again, or raise him in the household. Those were the options 50 years ago. So sitting here tonight, you all have much better options than my parents did 50 years ago. Are they perfect? No. Are they what you need to walk out of here tonight? No. But we are going to talk about ways you can utilize current resources of your own, what the government tries to provide currently, and educate you more about what you want to advocate for individually and as a group going forward, because there's clearly a lack of wonderful housing opportunities, because we hear it from all of our clients, from all of our friends, that I want my child to live more independently, but there's no place for them to go. And as Jackie mentioned, there are a lot of neat things that are coming on board, and her firm does a lot to help families understand their options and find what's right for them. But the reality is, how many of you today have the loved one who will need housing currently living in your own house? Yup, that's why we figured you're here tonight. That's my case. Unlike Megan, my brother's not going to live with me. I don't think he wants to, and he's not going to. So we've got to find that right environment. But because I mentioned he's older, my parents never really planned for that. And so for the last 20 years, I've been pushing research studies in front of them, trying to point out that there are lots of advantages of living more independently than he currently does at home. Now, he needs supports, he needs help, but the reality is, the sooner that loved one's out of the household, if the parents are still young enough to help them make the adjustment, how great is that? I fear personally, my parents are going to die in their house with him living there. Now I've got to move him out of the house, closer to us. They live in St. Louis. We're up here. Glencoe's my community. He'll be closer to me. He's got to adjust to the death of parents, changing environment, and limited family supports because my parents won't be there to do it. So the sooner he's able to find a place, the better it's going to be, because my parents can then help him adjust to that new lifestyle. So I'm appreciative of all you being here, learning more tonight with us, because if you move a little faster with your family because of what you learned tonight, they're going to be better off. So walk out of here tonight knowing that and feeling good about being here. Second thing I want to ask is, how many of you believe in the housing fairy? Okay, we've got 1 or 2 that might still believe in the housing fairy. I unfortunately have some bad news. I've looked into it, we've done research. Housing fairy doesn't exist. So unfortunately, nobody's going to drop a perfect housing solution on your lap for free that meets all of your family's needs tomorrow. It's not going to happen, unfortunately. But what you want to do is make yourself as aware of what government options are currently available and stay on top of legislation as new things come on board. The legislation coming in 22 was mentioned earlier tonight. There will be more things that will follow that. And if that proves to be successful, there will be more things in that direction. If, God forbid, the smaller housing units fail, who knows where we end up? But things seem to be moving in the right direction. And it's people like you that will help it keep moving that way. So how many of you have loved ones in Illinois who are on the PUNS list? That's a good answer. As you probably know, most of the housing supports that come with financial assistance require you to be on the PUNS list. You're seeking services. Now, until your situation becomes dire, as Megan mentioned, we've got 20,000 people just like your loved one who's on that list. So from a planning perspective, that's what I do for a profession, I wouldn't have you hang all your hopes on getting your golden ticket pulled, right? It's a resource that's out there. A very few fortunate folks will get some of that. And even if you do get it, as Jackie mentioned, there's all kinds of strings attached to how you can use that funding, where you can go, and what your options are. So the idea of holding out hope that, well, if I get put from PUNS, everything's going to be better. It's not, right? PUNS is there. You need to be on the list for the other supports, but you really can't sit back and rely on that being your solution. And the reality is, as Jackie mentioned at the end of her presentation, almost all the options that you're going to find to be accessible and acceptable to your family are going to require some financial effort on your family's part. How much of that depends on what you want, but you've got to leave here tonight realizing you're going to have to help fund that to some degree. The government can't do it all for you and give you what you really want. Okay? So with that, let's look at what government resources are out there. We can go through this pretty quickly because from a monetary standpoint, it's not going to move the needle a whole lot, but you should be aware of what those things are. So there's a Medicaid waiver. In Illinois, there's 9 different varieties of the waiver. We're not going to go through all this tonight, but SILA is one. So the integrated living in a community, that's that. In-home support, so if you want to have the loved one staying with you, getting support where they currently are. Then there's therapy and day services and other things that go along with that. But the reality is, it's going to be limited resources through Medicaid. And if you haven't checked recently, Illinois is not real good at providing Medicaid services. So there's that concern as well. There's also intermediate care facilities. Probably none of you would choose that in most cases, but that's another Medicaid waiver piece. So become familiar with what the Medicaid waiver options are. If any of those might be appropriate for your family, you would want to pursue that if you get pulled from PUNS. Okay? Section 8 housing vouchers, managed by HUD. How many of you have read really favorable reviews about HUD services? We haven't met many either, okay? They're out there, they're an important organization. That's who runs the Section 8 program. It's a process, right? You don't just click 2 buttons online like you do to open an ABLE account. HUD's a detailed process with a lot of waiting. And then if you get chosen, you get a physical certificate. And you think, oh great, now I've got a Section 8 voucher. I'm gonna go get my housing. Has anyone looked in the geographic area around us at how many Section 8 apartment units are available? One person in the back did. Did you find a lot? Correct. What very few options there are typically for the elderly. And the reality is we did a pretty broad search. We kept making our circle wider to figure out how far do we have to go to find someone on the North Shore a Section 8 housing apartment? It's not attractive. We found about 6 within about a 10-mile radius. That's not great. So if you want to have your loved one live near you and you happen to live around here, they're not going to. And to get a reasonable number of options to choose from, you've got to go really wide and far, or to parts of Chicago you'd probably not want to have your loved one living in. So the idea that a Section 8 voucher is going to be your ticket out is probably a misnomer. So don't count on that one either. Down payment assistance, it's great to get money from other people. Awesome. Ironically, there's a no down payment loan program through the USDA, the same folks who keep us safe eating at Chipotle. They actually have a program where if you're willing to live in what they consider to be rural America, which they claim is 97% of the landmass, if you're willing to live there, they will give you down payment assistance. The problem is, if you want them to live near you and you happen to live around here, you don't live rurally. And to get to that state, you've got to go pretty wide or pretty far south in Illinois to get to what they consider to be rural. Okay, so that's not an option either for most people. If you've got a veteran in your family and you're trying to find support for them, The good news is the VA has lots of supports, including discounted mortgages and other housing supports, but that's probably not the majority of this room. So you get down to, okay, 2 can live cheaper than 1, right? I've always said that about marriage. Doesn't always work out that way, but theoretically, 2 can live cheaper than individuals living separately. So living together, co-housing, different kinds of things that Jackie's talked about tonight, can be a way to save money if families come together. And the last thing up on the screen is the ABLE accounts. Don't have a lot of time to go into this, but if your loved one's receiving SSI and Medicaid, and the majority of their funds when you pass away will be in a special needs trust for their benefit, can you spend that money on basic housing? Correct, you cannot. So a special needs trust cannot pay for basic housing. However, an ABLE account can. This isn't the night for trusts and ABLE accounts, but if you have an ABLE account, its distribution rules are much more flexible than the rules around special needs trusts. So if you have a special needs trust and you need it to pay for basic housing, you can make a distribution from the trust into an ABLE account and have the ABLE account pay that housing expense. So file that away in the back of your head if that's your situation. Okay? So what can you do now? Well, you can cry, or you can take some of these steps on this page, which is really addressing the question we had up front just a minute ago, which is build your network. Talk to the families sitting around you tonight when you walk out of here. Talk to other agencies in Chicago that you respect. Build that network for your family. Because you don't know who's going to give you that one tip or one opportunity that you didn't know existed, but the broader your network is, the more chances you have to find that information. Because one of the things that's disappointing is you see all these different opportunities. It's 6 units here, it's 10 units there. If you're not one of the first 6 or 10 to latch onto that opportunity, it's gone, right? So the broader your network is, the more people you're talking with, the more people you're in community with, trying to talk about shared ideals for housing, the better your odds are you're going to find a good place for your loved one. If you stay at home and you just worry about tomorrow, which is what we all do, it's going to be a lot harder to find the best solution. Okay? So build those networks. Focus on life skills too. One of the challenges that anybody would have moving out of their home environment to a new place is they have to have executive functioning skills or a lot of supports, possibly 24/7 supports. Those cost money. The more things your loved one can do, regardless of what those things are, the less costly it'll be for your family to provide things out of pocket. So utilize, if your child's still under the age of 22 in Illinois, utilize those school supports and transition supports to learn those life skills. Look for agencies in the community that provide that development post-high school, and do what you can to increase those skills as best you can. It'll make it easier going forward. The one caveat to that is, let's say you get a great job. Matt's had more jobs than I've had. He's got a much more impressive resume than I do. But the reality is, your career may also impact where you're willing to live. So if you've got a great job that meets all of your needs from an employment standpoint and a life skill standpoint, your circle of how far you're willing to live from that is impacted. Your ability to utilize public transportation or things like Uber is going to impact where you can live. So there's lots and lots of factors. We can't possibly address all of them tonight, but these are things you should be thinking about as far as where you want your loved one to live. And then the last one, researching what's out there. The one key to that is go out there and actually look at these places. Not necessarily go to Arizona, but there's places locally you can go and visit and see, how does that setting work? How happy are those people? Matt's thrilled with his situation. Hopefully others are as well. But talk to the families who have those and see what they like and what they don't like. So as you move forward with your planning, you know from personal experience from those families what worked and what didn't. You can have hopefully a great setting for your loved one. Also, remain flexible, okay? You might have a list of 20 things that you have to have for your loved one. I would say if you can knock 10 of those off, sign up for it. If you wait till you get all 20, you will never get that ideal housing situation. You have to be willing to accept less than perfect and accept the good. That goes really with all special needs planning, but especially for housing. It's so hard to get the perfect because there's so few available places to go. Okay? Make it work. So the final takeaways, pretty obvious, the first one. Let's not rely on the public government to take care of it for us. We're going to have to be heavily involved, maybe more than you'd like to be, in finding a good housing solution. You're going to start with the PUNS list and then immediately start making alternative plans. Okay? When I say alternative plans, it's more than one. Because how many of you lived your entire life, adult life, let's say post-high school or college, in one setting? Not very many, right? Maybe 0 in the room. So the idea that we're going to take our loved one in their 20s and find a great housing solution for them, and that's going to work for the next 50 years for them, well, it didn't work for you. Why are you going to assume it's going to work for them? So you've got to have, unfortunately, more than one plan. You have the immediate plan, and then you have the uh-oh plan when that doesn't work. Why would it not work? Well, let's say you're in an apartment building and you're, someone who needs assisted living or supported living, but there's lots of others in that same building who don't. And then the building gets sold. And the new landlord says, you know what? We're redoing this. We're going to condos. Everybody's out. I hope you're still alive to help your loved one when that situation happens. You need to have a plan B. What if they're in there with roommates? And you love those families on the front coming in. It just didn't work out the way you thought it would. And maybe your child's the one who doesn't fit as well as the others do. Now you need a plan B. So my point is, one plan is critical. 2 plans are almost as critical. You've got to have a backup. You've got to have an idea what you're going to do if it doesn't work. Okay? Move earlier rather than later. My brother's a perfect example of that. Options can disappear quickly. You want to take advantage of whatever is a good option when it becomes available to your family. Also, utilize the family network to provide that transition support beyond any agency you might use, because the family is a critical piece of this whole process. So do it while you can and utilize either parents or siblings as part of that process. And then the care guide. We've talked about that in other sessions. The care guide's a non-legal document. It's not part of your legal estate plan, but it's really the goals and wishes for the family. So have down in writing what you want for your loved one. If they can communicate that, get their thoughts on paper, because you don't know when you're leaving this earth. And if someone else is going to help to implement this plan for housing and it's not going to be you, they need to know as much as they can about the goals and wishes you have for your family and specifically for your loved one when you're not there to articulate it for them. Okay? So with that, I'll thank you all for coming.
Oh, can I just add one thing?
Yep.
I'm sorry. About the reaching out to families, meeting other people, networking. There is the iPad Facebook group. Has people heard of that? You've heard? It's the Illinois Parents of Adults with Developmental Disabilities Facebook group. Illinois Parents of Adults with Developmental Disabilities, iPad. It's on Facebook. Personally, I think it's one of the single-handedly maybe the best resource we have in Illinois. And increasingly, you see families posting things like, I'm looking to develop community housing. This is what my daughter needs. This is what we're looking for. Do you need puns? Do you not need, or do you need to be having the waiver? Do you not need to be on the waiver? Here's where we are. We need nursing services. Could we share whatever the case may be? It is an excellent resource for families in Illinois to try to navigate all of this, because in addition to all these other important takeaways, you're probably taking away that this is all very complicated and overwhelming. An iPad is like a rabbit hole. You can learn a lot if you go down pretty deep, right?
Very true.
So, and people will answer your questions. So it's a really great resource after this.
So the question that was asked earlier about how do you network with people. So obviously you have to start talking about a picture you have. You have to be able to say to someone, so we're thinking 3-5 years, Amy's going to move out, but we don't know, Colleen, how that's going to happen. When are you thinking Ross is going to move out? And what's your plan? And you start sharing information about that with other people, and you start connecting, and you go for coffee, and you meet these people and find out who they are, and you start to build relationship. And that can make a lot of difference as you head down a path to thinking about possible people that would live in a setting that you might try to create together. We do things called call to action meetings where we invite people to come in and hear about our training, and we usually get 10 families out of that who start to work together towards a goal. So if you already know a family group, 2 or 3, those are folks who you might be able to start with to be able to create something. Did you want to say something, Carol?
It's just been a real pleasure working with you. I had been with a smaller group of families and then got to a certain level and then sort of rolled into CCHI, which is a group that's hoping to develop housing for supportive housing for their loved ones on the North Shore. And it's just been they've been a great resource. I've learned a tremendous amount. And again, you know, we're fortunate to live here. We're fortunate to live in Illinois, but what I perceive about living in Illinois at this point in time is the leg up, because the rest of the country is really, the momentum is there. And I think that actually it creates a huge advantage for Illinois. And as hard as it is to be sometimes, I'm not saying everything, the challenges that we have with our loved ones who have special needs and disabilities, it's like you have to move forward with this because it's a really pressing issue. And it's not easy, but I really believe that there's going to be huge changes in Illinois that's going to be because of groups like this and meetings like this, and it's really important. So,
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol.
And guys, thank you all for coming out tonight. I know people have to leave. Please fill out your evaluations so we know what we did right, what we did wrong, what you want to see next time. We're happy to try to respond to that. And if you have additional questions, we will stick around and be sure to answer those. But thank you all for coming, especially thank you to the La Chapelle family for sharing their story.